What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Missed you guys last week as I took a work trip to Mexico where we could not record, but Matt and I are back and we're ready to talk about my favorite sport, NBA basketball. That is right. We're turning the page from football this week. We're going to catch up on the NBA season, starting with talking about Matt's favorite team and my favorite team, the Detroit Pistons and the Sacramento Kings. We have a lot of grievances about both teams for various reasons. So we'll go through those. Then we're going to talk through the West. And if anybody is a potential challenger for the Denver Nuggets, who kind of seem like they're on cruise control this season, I'm wondering if they have that switch that they can flip to really turn it on when it comes playoff time. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to wrap up with a little Luka Doncic talk. He's having another amazing season. The Mavs look like they're kind of a play-in, play-off team, with Kyrie being able to play a little bit more and some of the things going on there. So, my favorite guy, Luka, got to talk about him on the first NBA pod of the season. So that's where we're going. Happy to be back. Let's go get Matt and let's go. All right, Matt is here, back from our brief hiatus. Matt, when I don't talk to you for a week on the pod, it feels like it's been so much longer than 1 week.
Yeah, no, it really does feel like it's an eternity.
I know. So,
It's like, how do I do this?
not like we don't talk through text like every day, but especially when I was in Mexico, I have like shoddy phone service. I was there for like
Right.
3 days and I was like, I don't think I've talked to Matt in like a whole week. So I had to go find
Yeah.
some like funny sports story to send you.
No, yeah, I knew you were down there, so I was like, yeah, well, I'll talk to him when he gets back.
Yeah. Well, I am back. The pod is
Yeah.
back. And we're going to start talking about NBA basketball today. I was looking at the NBA season and I was like, all right, first NBA pod of the season. What big storylines do we want to catch up on? What's the most important things that's going on this season? And I was like, you know what? It's what's going on with your team and what's going on with my team. That's the most important to us.
Yeah.
That's what we're leading off with.
Which means it's the most important thing to America.
That's, you can't argue with that logic. So instead of talking about Jokic potentially winning another MVP, the ascension of Oklahoma City and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the West, I decided we would lead off with the thing that's been bothering Matt the most this season. And I know this because I'll be sitting at my house randomly on a Sunday and get a text, and Matt's just like, oh, fucking Monty Williams. I can't stand this guy. Matt, your
The,
team, the Detroit Pistons, have a massive Monty Williams problem right now.
yeah. Yeah, they fucking do. There are like Division 4 high school basketball teams that are better coached than this team. It is absolutely atrocious.
It's kind of amazing that it's that bad this soon because what are we? We're like 50 games into the season
Yeah.
right now. So in the offseason, the Pistons decide they want Monty Williams. They go to try to get him, and he says, no, thank you. I don't want to coach the Pistons. And they're like, but what if we give you a gigantic bag of money? And he was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, hold on. What if we give you the largest bag of money that any NBA team has ever given a coach? And he was like, you know what? I'll do it. I'll do it for the money. 6 years, $78.5 million, the largest contract ever handed out to a head coach in NBA history
At the time.
at the time.
It has now been surpassed twice.
Yeah. And you guys want to get rid of him just over halfway through the NBA season. Incredible stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the stuff that we're seeing, like there's no coming back from that. Like you can't roll into next season and look for all of Dwayne Casey's flaws, like he was a relatively competent NBA coach, right? Like you that wasn't necessarily the guy you wanted, coaching a bunch of young guys, but you give him a bunch of vets, like he's gonna make sure that they are running their defensive scheme right, that their fundamentals are solid, all that shit. Monty Williams doesn't give a fuck because nobody knows what they're doing out there.
There was two things that kind of amazed me with Monty Williams. The first is that it seems like there's no alignment between him and the front office. Like the front office
No.
drafts guys like Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey,
Yep.
like guys who need to play and develop.
Yep.
And Monty comes here and he's like, I don't know what went on with the Jaden Ivey thing. Like, I don't know if he just doesn't like him or what. But when Jaden Ivey was drafted, we sat here and talked about like, oh yeah, he might be a little bit raw year one, but as he gets more minutes and more reps, he's going to get a lot better. And they decide to just not give him any minutes or any reps.
Well, you know who he originally did that to? Mikal Bridges, who's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's just funny that you're a young team who needs to develop and you bring in a guy who's like
Mm-hmm.
and this was the criticism about Dwayne Casey too, is because he wants to play vets. And you
Yeah.
bring in this guy who's like, no, I don't really want to develop these guys. I just want to collect my money. And
Yep.
I can't even, it's hard to say, like, what is he doing besides just waiting for the buyout? You know,
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
amazing.
other than losing, I'm really not sure what you can say he's doing.
Well, it's funny because during my MBA, I read a study about employees who quit their jobs and end
Mm-hmm.
up staying at that job because they're offered more money.
Yeah.
Those employees only stay at that job for an average of another 6 months
Yeah.
because you don't quit a job because of money. You quit because of leadership and you quit because of a lot of other factors.
Yeah.
And you might find a better offer for yourself out there. But typically, when someone quits, there's other factors besides money. Monty Williams didn't want this job. And the Pistons ownership and front office was like, we're just going to keep saying numbers until you say yes.
Yeah.
It's like the cheese at Olive Garden when they're like, say when, and you just start putting money on top of Monty Williams. And he's like, okay, now at 78.5 million.
The worst part about it too is that like between Gores, Weaver, Tellum, like the big front office in Detroit, they were all split on who they wanted. And then like he he wasn't even like part of the discussion. And then that was like, all right, well, we can't agree, so let's throw a ton of money at him.
We can't compromise on one guy, so let's get a guy that none of us wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
That's the solution.
Yeah, that's generally how it works, right?
Well, that kind of brings me to point two is so Monty Williams was the coach of the Phoenix Suns before this. And he has that really bad Suns team that gets really hot in the bubble and goes undefeated in the bubble and almost makes the
Yeah.
playoff. They get Chris Paul. They win a franchise high
Yep.
amount of games. They go to the NBA finals and lose to the Bucks. They come back the next year and beat the franchise high and win 64 games. And they're the one seed and lose to Luka in the second round. So you have this guy that took this team from just an absolutely abysmal train wreck to seemingly a perennial contender. And everybody in Phoenix is like, no, he's not it. We're going to get rid of him. And that's the guy you decided to give $78.5 million to.
Yep.
Like, that should be a sign that something's not right there
Yeah.
when he's having that amount of success. And they're like, no, he's actually the problem. Let's get rid of him.
I'm not sure if we should throw that label on Adrian Griffin right now or not. Because I mean that's kind of the situation, right? But then they went out and hired Doc Rivers, so I don't know that it was about anything related to basketball. So
Who would you rather have be your head coach? Monty Williams or Doc Rivers?
can I choose death?
That was the third option.
Yeah.
I figured that was just a given. The Doc thing is so funny because, Milwaukee's off to a really good start and they decide to fire Adrian Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, we're going to bring Doc Rivers in. And the very first thing Doc does is come out and be like, I told them that they don't know what they're doing and that this is a stupid move and I don't understand why they're making it. It's
Yep.
like, that's what I want in my head coach to have with
I
one of
don't
like,
know why you want me, but here I come.
if you really thought it was that bad of an idea, why did you do it? Right? Like you're taking over a team that has championship expectations. I mean, whether they should or not, they have
It,
one of the top two players in the world. So, of course they
he's
do.
doing it because it's his last chance at being a head coach in the NBA.
If I was Doc, I would have just stayed in the media and stayed away from all the ridicule. Like he was doing a pretty good job. He was on a podcast with Bill Simmons that was pretty good. He was doing some stuff with ESPN. He got to hang out with his son and all
Mm-hmm.
that. And then the Bucks come and they're like, "Well, here's a job that you don't want. Come do it." And it's like a very similar situation because it's not going well so far.
Yeah.
And like you convinced a guy who didn't want to do it to do it. Like maybe in a profession where there's only 30 of these jobs, you should take somebody who's hungry and wants to do it and give them one of the 30 jobs instead of retreading all of these guys that nobody wants. Like, has there ever been a
Yep.
more sure bet that the Bucks are going to lose in game 7 in round 2? I don't think I can have a more sure bet than that. It's like the 76ers are losing in round 2, the Bucks are losing in 7 games in round 2.
Yeah.
That's the Doc Rivers special.
If any series goes to game 7, they're losing that.
So my future brother-in-law is a big Bucks fan. And my parents were telling me they watched the Giannis Antetokounmpo documentary on
Mm-hmm.
Netflix, and they're like, "Wow, that's really amazing. I love that guy." And I was like, well, the reason that they're releasing it right now is because the tide is kind of turning on Giannis at this point, where ownership changes, you've gotten multiple coaches fired,
Yep.
you've used your contract extension multiple times as leverage to have your team sell the future and bring in Drew Holiday and then bring in Dame. And then when the team's not good, he comes out and he's like, well, look at like why we're not good. New ownership, new coaches, new players. Like this is the problem. All of that is because of you.
Yeah.
So my future brother-in-law, who absolutely adores the Bucks and loves Giannis, his favorite player ever, is like having a hard time watching this team right now with everything that's going on.
The other side of that too is like you have Dame there and like he was I don't know if you saw like the interview he did recently. He's like, yeah, no, like I play ball and then I go home and watch boxing and sit by myself because understandably he didn't uproot his whole family, pull them out of school and take them to Milwaukee with him. Like,
Yeah, but apparently too, he's also going through a divorce, and his kids are far
yes,
away,
so
and like,
that's like making it worse too.
yeah,
So I've got to imagine the last 2 to 3 years have probably been taxing.
this is kind of the through line of this podcast so far. It's like
Yeah.
if people don't want to work for you, don't make them work for you. Like
Yeah.
Dame did not want to go there. And I know that when he got traded there, it was this whole like, oh man, I'm going to play with Giannis. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of excitement for it. But
Mhm.
yeah, eventually the reality sets in of like, you have an entire life outside of work you have to live,
Yeah.
and you're living it in Milwaukee instead of Miami,
Right.
which is where your whole family wanted to go.
Right. Yeah. And like by all accounts, like he's pretty tight with Bam Adebayo too. So it's like you go there, you actually have like a social network, a connection for your family to latch onto. So it's not just like, all right, we're like really starting from square zero.
Yeah, everybody take this with a grain of salt because I obviously don't know him and I love him. Giannis is one of my favorite players, but he doesn't really seem like a super fun dude to me. Like, do you think Dame and Giannis hang out after games and stuff? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like Dame is going home and watching boxing by himself and being miserable.
Yeah, well, and let's look at where Giannis started. right? This isn't a guy that got to where he is by like really like having a lot of fun outside of basketball, right? Like that basketball kind of is the thing for him.
That's why he's like
Dame,
kind of the perfect dude for Milwaukee, right?
right. But like that's never been who Dame is. Like he's always kind of, like had the music side hustle, right? Even though he clearly didn't need it, but like
Dame
he
Dalla.
he loved it and he made time for it anyways.
The life lesson here is that Joe Cronin is a home wrecker. He Dame asked for a trade and Joe Cronin ruined his life. Who really won that trade? Joe Cronin's like, you want to see what happens when you demand a trade? I'm going to exile you to Milwaukee. And everything has gone downhill since then. So
I'm gonna make you get a divorce.
I, I don't think that was in the cards when the trade happened.
It's his 4D chess move.
Actually, like Joe Cronin is low key like the most brilliant mastermind GM that's ever existed. Or like I would think that, but the most valuable piece he wanted in the Dame trade was DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's going about as well as you could have expected.
Yeah. I was going to save this for the hot takes pod, but I have enough stored up now where we can do this on this one. If they could redo it, do you think Milwaukee would still trade for Dame? And do you think Portland would just have rather had the Heat's offer or rumored offer?
I don't think it stops Milwaukee from doing the trade. Like the issues that Milwaukee is having right now, like none of that has to do with them acquiring Dame, right? Maybe expectations have changed, but I mean not really, right? Because you had Giannis and the expectation was we have Giannis, we need to win a championship. I don't know if Joe Cronin is wise enough or humble enough to look at this situation and say, hey, you know what? Not taking on DeAndre Ayton here is actually like the asset. And that Miami deal might have actually been better just because I wouldn't have had to take on DeAndre Ayton's contract.
Also, like, so we don't really know what was on the table from Miami for sure.
Right.
But I look back at the package of like Tyler Hero, Nikola Jovic, and Jaime Jarquez, who's
Yeah.
been like really good this season,
Mm-hmm.
which again is like a point in the column of when you get to a certain point in the draft guys who know how to play basketball. Don't
Yeah.
draft dudes who can jump out the gym but can't play basketball. And I just look at that and I'm like, well, I look at what they got. And then I look at what Miami potentially offered. And I'm like, I kind of would rather have what Miami was offering and not this like
Yeah.
DeAndre Ayton and pieces. And then like I look at the Bucks defensive issues and I'm like, you know what would really help with some of those defensive issues? Drew Holiday, who now plays for the Boston Celtics, who
Yep.
are the number one seed in their own conference.
Yeah.
So kind of like double boned yourself there. As Dame is awesome, but he's getting a little older. And when small
Yeah.
point guards get a little older, you start losing a little bit of efficiency. Like I don't think Dame is the same guy on a night to night basis as he used to be.
No.
He has the peaks. Trust me, I watched him hit a dagger half court three against my team in overtime this year.
Yeah.
So the peaks are still there, but like the valleys are now lower and it's not as consistent. Um, the one team that wouldn't take any of that back is the Phoenix Suns
Yeah.
because they fucking hate DeAndre Ayton.
Yeah. And I understand why.
Hmm. I'm skipping ahead in the notes, but
Yeah.
I was thinking about this recently with the Phoenix Suns. And I was like, as a Sacramento Kings fan, I will never, ever get over the Luka thing. And it's funny because it's been years and people are like, you need to get over the Luka thing. we're a playoff team now. You got to support Fox and Sabonis. And I'm like, no, I will never, ever get over the Luka thing because you need a top 5 guy in the NBA to win a championship. And we don't have that on our roster. And Luka is that guy.
And it's like those things aren't mutually exclusive. You can sit there and like recognize that passing on Luka was the dumbest thing you possibly could have done. And then you did the asshole move of making Marvin Bagley Detroit's problem. Fuck you for that.
Now he's Washington's
But
problem.
and at the same time, like that doesn't stop you from being like, yeah, Fox and Sabonis are really good, and we're a playoff team now. Like this is what we've got, and that's who I'm supporting. You can do both of those, but in this day and age, nuance is apparently gone in any sort of conversation with sports.
Well, you can do those things unless you're a Kings fan, apparently. You either have to be 100% supportive of De'Aaron Fox, and if you say anything critical, then you're not a true fan. But we're going to talk about the Kings and their fans in a little bit because I have to air my grievances about this season as well. But I want to go all the way back to my original point that
we got so far from.
Well, I will never get over the Luka thing, right? But the teams, like when you go back and look at the Luka draft, everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe the Kings and the Hawks. The Kings drafted Marvin Bagley. The Hawks traded Luka for Trae Young, which is going to be an eternal debate for some reason. Because Atlanta fans, apparently, there's a lot of you on the internet. The team who doesn't get enough hate for not drafting Luka Doncic is the Phoenix Suns. Instead of drafting Luka Doncic, you drafted a guy who, before the end of his rookie deal or like right after his rookie deal, you didn't want to extend him. You like actively tried to avoid extending him. And then you basically had to beg somebody to take him off your hands.
Yeah.
Like this offseason, they were out in the street being like, oh, there's a trade going on. Do you guys want to put DeAndre Ayton in it? Do you want to put DeAndre Ayton in your trade? Does anybody want to put DeAndre Ayton in your trade? And Joe Cronin looked at that and said, you know who I want for trading away my franchise cornerstone superstar? DeAndre fucking Ayton. And again, the whole through line of this thing is like, don't make people work for you who don't want to work for you. Yeah. And like same thing with Monty Williams is maybe when a team is like, hey, I want this guy the fuck out of here. Even though other people think he's good, maybe you don't want that guy.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about that though, because I was looking at the West and I was like, you know, Phoenix could have just had Luka Doncic and Devin Booker for like 10 to 15 years.
Yep.
Could have just had that. And then you probably, I mean, if you don't make the Kevin Durant trade, you still probably have Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson to go with those guys. Or you do make the Kevin Durant trade and you have Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Luka Doncic. And I don't think Suns fans regret that decision enough.
No, they don't. Not nearly enough.
They need to know because they easily could have been like a perennial championship contender. And now they're kind of like, are they a contender? I don't know. Like they should be, but it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how if you are the Suns, you don't just like lament that draft every day. Because I still do that every day. Because the Detroit Pistons passed on Devin Booker, a Michigan native, for Stanley Johnson.
Milwaukee legend Stanley Johnson, just to bring it all the way back around. No, I agree with you. I mean, I look at drafts for all of my sports teams and think about like what could have been, but
yeah,
the one that will just always stick out to me is the Luka Doncic draft because I was so sure that he was the guy And I was like, this is it. And I remember exactly where I was. Do not make fun of me, but I was in the front row of an Imagine Dragons concert, taking a client from work and his daughter. And I looked at my phone, and Woj had said the Sacramento Kings draft Marvin Bagley. And I fell to my knees and wept like a small child. Not really, but I had this like, when you know something's wrong and you have this feeling in your gut where your whole stomach just drops?
Yep.
That was what happened. And my father-in-law was with me, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, you wouldn't understand. He's just not, he's not a sports guy, but I was distraught. It was really rough. And I never even tried to talk myself into Marvin Bagley. I was just like, this is wrong. And people are like, he can double jump and he played at Duke. And I was like, Luka Doncic
like
won championships in Europe at like 19 years old.
The argument, and he played at Duke. Like, okay.
Well, they're just like, the other guy played in Spain. We don't know anything about Spain. Like, how good are players coming out of Spain? And I'm like,
apparently really fucking good.
Have you ever watched Jose Calderon?
Exactly.
You don't even know. Not that Luka's Spanish, but I think that the team he played for was in Spain or whatever.
So,
the team he was coming up in. So yeah, I'll never get over that one. And I think Suns fans shouldn't get over it either. Suns fans are like, well, we went to a championship and we got Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And I'm like,
but you lost.
You could have had Luka and Booker for like 15 years.
Yeah.
Forever in sports talk.
You can like make the argument like they're like, oh, it's okay if you won a championship, but you didn't. And unless you win one real fucking quick, like there's no defense.
Do you think they can win this year?
No.
I was looking at the West as a whole and just thinking like, it's been a great season. There's a lot of good teams. Like I said earlier, OKC and Minnesota have taken a jump and they're tied for first in the West going into play. It is February 28th. So going into tonight's games, those two teams are tied for first in the West. And like we could do a whole podcast about how Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Anthony Edwards have become future faces of the league, and they're amazing. We could do the whole thing. Yep. And you could do a whole podcast about how Kawhi Leonard has been mostly healthy this year, and the Clippers have been awesome. And like,
imagine what a difference that makes.
I know. Well, people are like, that James Harden trade was really smart. And I was like, what changed is that Kawhi Leonard's healthy. If Kawhi Leonard's healthy, you're a championship contender.
For years, we've kind of like had this debate with Kawhi Leonard of like, how the hell do we even rank this guy? Because we know how good he is when he plays. Like when he plays, even with like him probably having declined a bit, he's still a top 10 guy. When he's gone, like that team is just a shell of itself.
Yeah, and he's already played 51 games this season. He only played 52 last year. The year before, he missed with an ACL. The 2 years before that, he played 52 and 57. So, like, this is going to be, I mean, knock on wood. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. But this is very likely going to be the most games he's played in his time with the Clippers, at least during the regular season. And that's like, what do you know? They're, like, really good, and they're climbing up the standings in the West. And undoubtedly, the James Harden trade has worked out well for them because they've been better since he got there. But I think that's going to be the most interesting team to watch in the playoffs, to have Kawhi, who's like the playoff god, versus like sharing the same team with James Harden, who's like the biggest playoff choker in sports history.
Perfectly balanced as all things should be.
I don't know if it's like, well, how do we tip the scales? Is it like, if Paul George is good, we win. If he's bad, we lose, because we're so balanced. But I was looking at the West and I was like, man, there's all these good stories. The Pelicans are playing well, the Kings and the Lakers and the Warriors, and there's all these things going on. But I watched Denver in the playoffs last year,
Yeah.
and I watched what Jokic did to everybody.
Yep.
And until I see it, I just don't believe that you can beat that guy in a 7-game series.
Yeah. And I will say, like, the one guy that I feel like can throw a monkey wrench in that is Kawhi Leonard. Like, when he chooses to turn it up to 11 on defense, no one is as impactful as he is. The length, like the reach he has, the size of his hands, the lateral agility, the strength, like it's the full package. And like the only guy that I feel like can really take like just a handful of those possessions where Jokic thinks he's really got something and turn it into points for his team is Kawhi.
It's possible, but I just see a scenario where Kawhi scores like 44 and plays great
Yep.
defense and all that. And then on the other side, it's like, oh, Jokic had a 44, 27, and 18. Great. What the
Meanwhile,
fuck are we going to do about
Harden
that?
goes like 2 for 13 from three.
They're just like, damn, Kawhi, why couldn't you guys pull it out? And he's like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's amazing. But yeah, that's the problem is that no matter who you have on your side, the other side has a guy who we talked about in the playoffs last year. And I asked you and Clint, like, what is a stat line for Jokic that you would actually be surprised by? And it is, it's like a 40, 20, 20 or something like that.
Yeah. Like at this point, I almost feel like it would have to be like a 60-point triple double.
Yeah. My bigger concern for the Nuggets is not anything to do with Jokic. And like I said, until someone actually beats him in the playoffs, I'm going to have a hard time picking against them.
Right.
But I'm worried that they're really going to miss Bruce Brown this year.
Yeah.
Like he was critical for them in the playoffs last year. And when you shorten that rotation down to like 7 guys and your 6th and 7th guy are Christian Brown and Reggie Jackson, I'm a little like, ooh, so now I got 7 guys and I got to rely on Reggie Jackson, Christian Brown, and Michael Porter Jr. in playoff series. Like,
and that's the thing is that now MPJ has to be good. They can't just be like, all right, like kind of stay out of the way and don't fuck everything up. Like he actually has to step up and be a good basketball player, which he is not.
yeah, I mean, we were calling for him to be benched in the playoffs last year. We were like, start Bruce Brown. And I just want to throw out there for all the listeners and everybody that gave me shit about this is during the championship parade last year, Bruce Brown's like, I'm not going anywhere. Things
he took
change.
The bag.
Yes, things change really fast when another team comes and says, would you like more cash on your Olive Garden salad, sir? You just tell us when. You tell us when and we'll stop. And he's like, you know what's good? $20 million. When the Nuggets can only offer you like 6.
Yeah.
So now he's wasting away in Toronto.
Yep.
Which is hilarious that the Pacers give him all this money and they're like, we're going to put you in this Siakam trade. So there's that. He went from winning a championship with Jokic and celebrating and being like, I'm going to be here, to wasting away in Toronto. Free Bruce Brown. Free him. The Kings should have traded for him at the deadline.
Yeah. He went from playing with a guy that Kenny Smith apparently didn't know was a good 3-point shooter until this year to playing in Toronto.
Yeah, so even with that, though, I'm still like, Jokic is just so good and he performs in the playoffs. So it's hard for me to pick against them, even if they're the 3 seed this year, especially because they just whomped like everyone last year. But I think there are some other interesting teams. Like I think the Thunder could throw a wrench in a lot of people's plans with Shai Gilgeous like taking over as being like a top 7 guy now.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of the thing is like, if you want to win a championship, you need like a top 5, 6, 7-ish dude. And I know that you can rank the guys ahead of time and someone else wins. And then you're like, he's the top 5 guy. But like, look throughout championship history, and there's very few teams who didn't have like a top 5 dude. But the Nuggets are kind of still it for me. So we skipped over this. Our teams were supposed to go first in this podcast.
Yeah, we really rabbit holed this one.
We're like 45 minutes in, and we've gone all the way around on my notes. We started at the beginning of my notes and went all the way backwards and talked about all the other things I wanted to talk about. And now we're coming back to the Sacramento Kings, which is okay. So the Sacramento Kings, I want to preface this by saying that this team is 33-24 right now. Last year at this time, they were 32-25. They're one game better than they were last year, which people are like, this is the best season ever, breaking this like 20-year slump that we had. They've been really good against good teams this season and really bad against bad teams and teams missing guys. Like, they've beaten the Nuggets multiple times. They've beaten the Warriors, the Clippers, all these playoff teams. They have losses against the Pistons, the Hornets. And then on Monday this week, they lost to the Miami Heat, who were missing like 8 dudes to suspension and injury.
Yep.
Including Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero. Like, basically the only guys who played were Jarquez and Bam. And then the Heat come into Sacramento and beat them. So I understand the fans' frustration, but we've had multiple home games recently where the fans have booed this team. Imagine after what we've been through for the last 20 plus seasons, fucking booing this team.
Yeah.
Imagine like the Bears beating the Lions at home next year and the fans booing the Lions.
I wouldn't put it past people, unfortunately.
This is the problem, is like, I feel like people just throw away the last 20 years and they're just like, nah, forget about that. We're good now. We need to win these games. And like, I understand the frustration, because the problem with this team is that they're not consistent. They play up and down to their level of competition. And like these losses to like teams like the Hornets and like the Miami, who's missing 8 guys, could very well be the difference between being a playoff team and being a play-in team. They play the Denver Nuggets tonight, but going into that game, they're the 7th seed, which is a play-in spot for some reason. And I think if they don't make the playoffs, like the actual playoffs, I'm going to consider this season a failure.
That's fair.
You know, I was looking back at the Tyrese Halliburton trade for Sabonis, and I was like, man, this is a big year for this, because trading away Halliburton instead of Fox moves up your timeline a lot. Like, you need to make playoff appearances and start winning playoff series now. You can't wait until down the road because you aged your team and you're like, this is our team we're moving forward with. And we need to find out this season. Like, one of the reasons we really need to make the playoffs is because we need to find out if Sabonis is a guy that we can rely on in the playoffs.
Yeah.
He was not good last year, but he had a fractured hand. Draymond Green stomped on his chest. I think the Warriors threw some looks at them they weren't ready for. So what I need to find out this season is I need to see you in a playoff series against a different team. I'm not talking about a 1-game elimination scenario like the play-in. I need full-on 7-game series, and I need you to show up and prove to me that we traded away Tyrese Halliburton, who's fucking awesome, for someone that we can rely on in the playoffs. And I love Sabonis. He's been amazing this season. I think he's leading the league in triple doubles right now. And just every night is incredible. But none of that matters if you don't, 1, make the playoffs, and 2, show up this year.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be like, I wasn't a fan of the trade when it happened. I'm still on the side of, I would have liked to have traded Fox away and kept Halliburton and built around him. I understand why they did what they did. I wouldn't trade last year for anything, but I'm still in the Halliburton camp, which is another reason that Kings fans hate me, even though I've been a Kings fan for 30 years. But you got to prove it this year. I can't have you either not make the playoffs or make it and just not show up. Like, I'm not even saying you got to win the series because I understand that they could be like a
Yeah,
5 or a 6 seed and have to go up against like Denver, Oklahoma City, or something like that.
you got to put up a fight.
You got to play well for the
Yeah,
whole series. You can't just this no show thing where they're better without you on the floor is not going to work for me.
yeah. Like in the games you lose, like give your opponent a scare. You can't just get mopped in 4 games.
This is this is the thing too, is like, so you make the playoffs last year and you're the 3 seed, but you're the underdog against the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah,
You give the Warriors all they can handle. You take them to 7 games, and it takes a 50-point Steph amazing game to beat you guys. Fox has the emulsion
yep,
fracture, all that. I was fine with them losing that series last year. I was just really proud of
yeah,
them for being there and putting up a fight.
yeah,
But they brought back the entire same team. They brought everybody back. We talked about how they had the opportunity to make a big splash and make an improvement. They opted not to do that. Now you're kind of locked into this team for the foreseeable future because you're going to have to
yeah,
pay like Monk and other guys this offseason.
yeah,
I want to see what you learned from that loss.
yeah,
Good teams lose sometimes and they learn from it and they come back better. And so far, I haven't seen that this season with the inconsistency we talked about. Like, that's the difference between a good team and a great team, is that a great team shows up the same every night. It
yeah,
does their thing, and they're just not doing that right now. So I need to
yeah.
see it, from them this year.
I I think you kind of need to see too that like specifically Fox and Sabonis, like they took losing that series to heart. You need to see it because when you don't change the roster, the only way the team can get better is if the players get better. And like that rests squarely on those two players' shoulders. The rest of the team will go as those two guys go. You know, Fox is young enough that like okay, yeah, like I can kind of see I can see how like it going either direction, you know. Um
Yeah, I don't give him as much grief because he was the one guy who was really good
yeah,
in almost
right,
every game that
right.
series.
But like now you got to come back and like bring that same heat. It can't be like, well, see, I proved myself. And shucks, we lost in 5.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm at. Is like, I want to see what you guys learned. You remember back when Fox and Monk played at Kentucky together?
Yeah.
They got knocked out of the NCAA tournament, and there's that like famous picture or video of the two of them like crying in the locker room. And they're
Yeah.
like, we cared so much. That's the guy I want to see.
Yeah.
That's the guy I need to see this season. And he's been great this season, but
Hmm.
this team can't just like not show up against the Pistons who have won 9 games or like the Hornets who have won 13. Right? Like,
You can't lose to Monty Williams.
no. That's really the through line of this podcast, going all the way back to where we started, is you lost to Monty Williams and the
Yeah.
fans booed you. So maybe it was deserved.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
I just can't fathom after everything we've been through so far, like the last 20 seasons, to go to a game of a
Yeah.
team that's 1 game better than they were at this time last season and boo them. It boggles the mind. One more thing before we sign off, because we didn't bring this up in the Doc Rivers segment, and I know how much you love to disparage Doc Rivers. The other thing Doc Rivers said is that Kawhi contacted him before he signed with the Clippers, and they talked about the Paul George trade, and he was like, Kawhi, are you sure you want to trade Shea Gilgeous-Alexander? Because I think he's going to be really good. And I think he meant that to make him sound smart and make him sound like, oh, I knew that Shea Gilgeous was going to be really good. I knew we shouldn't have
Yeah.
traded him. And all it did was make you sound like a fucking dumbass for not throwing your entire body in front of that trade
Yeah.
and keeping Shea. It's like the GMs who are like, yeah, well, we knew Tom Brady was going to be good, and we were just going to draft him in the 7th because we thought we could get him there. And it's like, if you knew he was going to be that good, you had 6 chances to take him.
Yeah.
And you didn't do it. You can't go back now and be like, well, I knew he'd be good. You fucking didn't.
No. Like if you knew he was going to be this, then like you don't give him away for Paul George.
I don't think they would make that trade right now. Like, would you trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for Kawhi Leonard and Paul George? Probably not. You'd probably rather have Shai.
No. I mean, I don't want Paul George on my team, period.
No, that's fair. But that's kind of the thing is I said this during the player ranking podcast we did is like, I think Shai's a top 10 talent, but I need to see this team actually win games. I want to test drive the car before I buy it. Well, they're first.
Fucking heard you.
Yep, they're first in the West. And so I'm ready to move them up the rankings.
Yeah.
And just for my dad, I'm bumping Jason Tatum out of the top 10. Haha. I told my dad, I was like, you're not going to like this podcast because it's a basketball podcast. And he's like, are you guys going to talk about how good the Celtics are? And I was like, I'm going to talk about the fact that it's amazing that they're the 1 seed in the East by a wide margin, and they don't even have a top 10 player on their team. That's incredible to me.
I really grind his gears, doesn't it?
It pisses him off every time. And that's what I'm here for. And that's what my son's here for. He'll grow up and he'll be like, you know, Dad, Tom Brady wasn't even a top 5 quarterback. And I'm like,
oh yeah,
little shit. He'll be like, Patrick Mahomes and Caleb Williams and these other guys that come into the league before he's 34 and has a sports podcast.
Oh yeah, I'll show him the ropes.
Bill Russell is higher on the GOAT list than LeBron James. I'm getting back in my dad's good graces. But that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up at Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. You can find our videos on TikTok at Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It's a long name, but you can't miss it. Am I missing one?
I don't remember.
Takes 1 week off, and I can't remember shit. I didn't even know where my notebook was when we started recording. I am a mess.
The email?
No, I got the email and the TikTok.
Okay.
I thought there was another one. I don't know. I got rid of Twitter because I don't know if you've been on Twitter lately, but
I mean, it's always bad.
Yeah, it only is going downhill. So we're talking about moving our recording time to Wednesdays and having the podcast come out on Thursdays for a little bit here. We might move it to Mondays and have it come out on Tuesdays. So stay tuned for that. We'll have the official decision for you next week. And I think next week we're going to try to have Clint on to do Hot Takes podcast. So we'll figure that out. We'll figure out the day and we'll let you guys know. I used one of my hot takes today, but I really feel like all the Hot Takes podcast is going to be is I'm going to give you guys the first one that I've been waiting to give you guys. And that's going to be the whole podcast because it's a banger and it's like the perfect thing to say on a podcast with Matt and Clint. So I can't wait for that next week.
I'm very excited for it because you've been telling me that for like months now. And I just kind of need to know what it is at this point.
I've contemplated just texting it to you to get your reaction. I workshopped it.
Which, like, part of me wants to say do it, but I know that is not the right choice.
I was standing in the shower thinking about NBA hot takes, which is what I do in the shower. And this one came to me and I almost like when I got out of the shower, I almost sent it to you right away. And I was like, wait, no, we need the content until we get to March Madness.
Yeah.
Get Clint on and say it to both of them and hear them rejoice with because you guys are going to agree with it. And I've workshopped it places and it pisses a lot of people off, but you two are going to be the only other 2 people I know who are just 100% going to be all in. And then we're going to talk about it the whole podcast and it's going to be great. So you guys can look forward to that.
I'm so fucking excited.
It is exciting. So you guys can look forward to that next week. Until then, enjoy the regular season basketball and NHL is on. We are only a couple weeks away from March Madness. So we're going to have 2 more NBA pods and then we're going to jump into March Madness. Maybe also with Clint if he wants to come back on now that we're talking basketball.
Yeah, probably.
which is something fun that we would look forward to every year. So good stuff coming. And then April is NFL draft month, which is going to culminate in Matt and I going to the draft in the end of April.
Yeah.
So a lot to look forward to. Wait, someone told me you guys should just record a podcast like in the streets of Detroit. And I was like, that might not be a bad idea. So we might have to figure that one out. But
yeah, we'll talk about it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. But all right, buddy. Until next week.
Yep.
See you guys soon.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Bye,
Bye,
Mike.
Robin.